You become what you don't heal, the cycle of trauma according to Jung. Have you ever found yourself repeating the same painful patterns in relationships? Do you sometimes react in ways that surprise even yourself? Perhaps you've caught yourself saying things that sound eerily like the very people who hurt you in your past. What if these aren't coincidences, but rather the echoes of wounds that haven't properly healed? Welcome to You Become What You Don't Heal, the cycle of trauma according to Jung. I'm thrilled you've joined me on this journey of discovery and healing. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to subscribe to Espello Interno, like this video, and share it with someone who might benefit from this knowledge. I promise you, the revelations in this video may fundamentally change how you understand yourself and your relationships. Carl Jung, the brilliant Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology, offered us profound insights into how unresolved trauma shapes our identity and behavior. His work reveals the uncomfortable truth that what we refuse to confront within ourselves doesn't simply disappear. It transforms us in ways we often fail to recognize. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. These powerful words from Jung highlight the central theme of our exploration today. The parts of yourself that remain in shadow, unacknowledged, unprocessed, unhealed, become the architects of your future experiences. Think about that for a moment. The trauma you haven't healed isn't just a painful memory. It's an active force shaping your perceptions, your choices, and ultimately, your destiny. Jung introduced us to the concept of the shadow, those aspects of ourselves that we reject, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. When trauma occurs, especially in childhood, we often push the pain into this shadow realm because it's too overwhelming to process. The child who experiences rejection learns to hide their authentic needs. The one who faces criticism develops a harsh inner critic. The child surrounded by chaos becomes the adult who either craves or creates disorder. What makes Jung's insight so revolutionary is his understanding that trauma doesn't just wound us, it transforms us. We don't merely suffer from our unhealed wounds. We unconsciously organize our entire lives around them. They become the lens through which we see the world and ourselves. Consider how a child who grows up with an emotionally unavailable parent might develop extraordinary sensitivity to others' emotional states. This hypervigilance served as protection in childhood, a way to navigate an unpredictable environment. But in adulthood, this same sensitivity might lead to taking responsibility for everyone else's feelings, creating relationships where personal boundaries dissolve. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about the complex, a cluster of emotionally charged ideas and memories that behave almost like an independent personality within us. Trauma creates these complexes, and when left unhealed, they take control in moments when we least expect it. The insidious nature of unhealed trauma lies in its invisibility to us. We don't see how it colors our perception. We don't recognize how it influences our choices. We remain unaware of how it draws us towards certain people and situations that unconsciously remind us of our original wounds. Jung observed that what remains unconscious doesn't stay dormant. It gets projected outward. We see in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The unhealed parts of us create a psychological blueprint that leads us to recreate familiar scenarios, even painful ones, because the familiar, however harmful, feels safer than the unknown. Consider the person who grew up with a critical parent who later finds themselves attracted to critical partners, or the child who never felt good enough who becomes an adult, perpetually trying to prove their worth through achievement. These aren't random patterns, they're manifestations of unhealed trauma seeking resolution. What makes this cycle particularly challenging is that it operates beneath the surface of our awareness. We don't choose these patterns consciously. Instead, we find ourselves mysteriously drawn to situations that trigger our unresolved wounds, often wondering why the same scenarios keep playing out in our lives. Jung called this process repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate traumatic experiences in an attempt to master them. It's as if the psyche believes that by returning to similar situations, it might finally find a different outcome, a healing resolution to the original wound. But here's where Jung offers us hope. This cycle can be broken. By bringing our unconscious patterns into consciousness, by shining light on our shadow aspects, we gain the power to choose differently. This is the beginning of true healing. As we continue our exploration, we'll delve deeper into how Jung's understanding of trauma offers us not just insight into our suffering, but a pathway toward wholeness. We'll examine how the trauma cycle manifests in relationships, careers, and even our relationship with ourselves. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll uncover the specific mechanisms through which unhealed trauma shapes our identity and explore Jung's revolutionary concept of individuation, the process by which we integrate our wounded parts to become more whole, authentic versions of ourselves. Remember, awareness is the first step toward transformation. By simply being here, engaging with these ideas, you've already begun the journey toward healing. If you're still with me, you've taken the first crucial step in understanding how unhealed trauma shapes your life. Now, let's venture deeper into Jung's revolutionary ideas about trauma and transformation. Jung believed that trauma doesn't just wound us, it creates a division within the psyche. When painful experiences overwhelm us, especially in childhood, we instinctively separate from parts of ourselves to survive. This psychological splitting creates what Jung termed the complex, a fragment of our personality that holds the traumatic experience and the emotions associated with it. These complexes don't simply fade away with time. They become autonomous, operating like distinct personalities within us. They influence our perceptions, trigger our emotional reactions, and ultimately drive our behavior in ways we often don't recognize as coming from within. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, Jung observed. This is a profound insight into how our unhealed wounds operate. When someone triggers an intense emotional reaction in us, one that feels disproportionate to the situation, we're often encountering our own unresolved trauma reflected back at us. Consider the person who feels instantly and inexplicably angry when someone doesn't respond to their text message right away. On the surface, this might seem like a simple case of impatience, but through a Jungian lens, we might discover that this reaction stems from a childhood experience of being ignored or neglected. The intense reaction isn't really about the text message at all, it's about an old wound being touched. Jung called this mechanism projection, our tendency to unconsciously attribute to others qualities or emotions that actually belong to our disowned parts. Projection serves as both a defense mechanism and a desperate attempt at healing. By placing our unintegrated aspects onto others, we can interact with these parts of ourselves from a seemingly safer distance. But here's the paradox. What feels safer in the moment perpetuates our suffering in the long run. When we project our unhealed wounds onto others, we remain trapped in the trauma cycle, unable to recognize that what troubles us most about others is often a reflection of what we haven't reconciled within ourselves. This brings us to Jung's concept of the trauma cycle, the unconscious repetition of painful patterns. The child who grows up feeling unsafe develops hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats. As an adult, this hypervigilance creates tension in relationships, often triggering the very rejection they fear most, thus confirming their belief that the world is unsafe. The cycle continues. Jung understood something profound about human nature. We are drawn toward both healing and repetition. Part of us seeks resolution of our wounds, while another part compulsively recreates familiar scenarios, even painful ones. This isn't a sign of weakness or failure. It's the psyche's misguided attempt at mastery. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, Jung stated. By this, he meant that our psychological symptoms, our anxieties, compulsions, and destructive patterns are actually attempts to avoid directly confronting and processing our original wounds. Rather than feel the full impact of our trauma, we develop elaborate psychological defenses that ultimately cause us more suffering. What makes this cycle particularly insidious is how it shapes our identity. We begin to mistake our adaptations to trauma for our authentic personality. The child who wasn't allowed to express needs grows into an adult who prides themselves on being low maintenance. The one who never received emotional attunement becomes the rational person who dismisses feelings as irrelevant. We wear our adaptations as badges of honor, not recognizing them as strategies we develop to survive untenable situations. Jung observed that we don't just internalize our trauma, we internalize our traumatizers. The critical parent becomes our inner critic. The dismissive caregiver becomes our inner voice that minimizes our needs and feelings. We continue the very treatment that wounded us, but now we do it to ourselves. This is perhaps the most painful way we become what we haven't healed. But Jung's understanding of trauma wasn't deterministic. He firmly believed in the human capacity for transformation. While he acknowledged that we cannot erase our wounds, he offered a radical alternative: integration. Rather than trying to eliminate our painful experiences, we can work to make them conscious, to understand how they've shaped us, and to reclaim the energy bound up in our complexes. This process begins with a simple yet challenging step: becoming curious about our patterns. When you find yourself reacting strongly, pause and ask, what's being triggered within me here? What old wound might this be touching? This moment of reflection creates space between stimulus and response, interrupting the automatic nature of the trauma cycle. Jung's approach differs significantly from some modern therapeutic modalities that focus primarily on symptom reduction. For Jung, symptoms aren't simply problems to eliminate. They're communications from the unconscious, signaling aspects of ourselves that need attention and integration. Consider the recurring nightmare that plagues someone for years. A purely symptom-focused approach might seek to eliminate the nightmare. But Jung would encourage exploration of the nightmare's symbolic content, understanding it as a message from the unconscious about something that needs conscious attention. This perspective offers profound hope. It suggests that even our most painful symptoms carry the seeds of healing within them. Our compulsions, our triggers, our inexplicable reactions, all can serve as entry points to deeper self-understanding if we approach them with curiosity rather than judgment. As we move into the next part of our exploration, we'll examine Jung's revolutionary concept of the wounded healer, how our trauma, once consciously integrated, can become the source of our greatest gifts and our deepest capacity for connection with others. We'll also explore practical strategies for breaking the trauma cycle, drawing from Jung's understanding of how unconscious material can be brought into awareness. Stay with me on this journey. The path to healing isn't about leaving our wounds behind. It's about transforming our relationship to them, discovering how they've shaped us, and reclaiming the authentic self that exists beneath our adaptations. If you've followed our journey so far, you've gained valuable insights into how unhealed trauma shapes our identity and perpetuates painful patterns in our lives. Now, we're ready to explore one of Jung's most powerful and hopeful concepts: the transformation of wounds into sources of wisdom and healing. Jung introduced us to the archetype of the wounded healer, the idea that our deepest wounds, once acknowledged and integrated, can become the wellspring of our greatest gifts to the world. This concept originated with the Greek myth of Chiron, a centaur who, despite being unable to heal his own wound, became the greatest healer of his time. Jung saw in this ancient story a profound psychological truth. Those who have confronted their own suffering often develop an extraordinary capacity to understand and help others. The doctor is effective only when he himself is affected, Jung wrote. Only the wounded physician heals. This isn't to glorify suffering, but to recognize that our wounds, when consciously worked with, can develop in us a depth of empathy and insight unavailable through any other means. Consider how many therapists, counselors, and healers were first drawn to their professions through their own experiences of trauma or hardship. The child who grew up navigating a parent's unpredictable moods might develop an exceptional ability to read others' emotional states. The person who struggled with addiction might gain profound insight into the nature of compulsion and freedom. What once was purely painful becomes, through conscious integration, a source of wisdom and connection. But Jung was clear. Transformation doesn't happen automatically. Many people suffer without ever transmuting their pain into growth. What makes the difference? Jung believed it was the willingness to turn toward our wounds with consciousness, to examine them without being consumed by them. This process begins with what Jung called shadow work, the courageous act of facing the disowned parts of ourselves. Shadow work isn't about eliminating our darker aspects, but about bringing them into relationship with our conscious self. When we acknowledge the entirety of who we are, including the parts shaped by trauma, we reclaim the energy that's been bound up in keeping these aspects hidden. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung famously wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. This statement captures the essence of his approach to healing trauma. True transformation comes not from trying to transcend our wounds, but from fully acknowledging their reality and impact on our lives. Jung observed that many people spend enormous energy trying to maintain an idealized self-image that excludes their wounded aspects. This pursuit of perfection actually keeps us trapped in the trauma cycle as we continuously reject and project the parts of ourselves that don't fit our ideal. True healing begins when we surrender the exhausting effort to appear flawless and embrace the entirety of our experience. But how exactly do we bring unconscious material into consciousness? Jung pioneered several approaches that remain powerful tools for healing trauma. One of his most significant contributions was his work with dreams. He viewed dreams not as random neural firings, but as communications from the unconscious, often revealing exactly what our waking mind is unwilling to see. Jung encouraged his patients to record their dreams, to engage with the images and emotions that arose during sleep. He believed dreams often compensate for the one-sidedness of our conscious attitude, showing us precisely what we're overlooking or denying. For someone caught in a trauma cycle, dreams might reveal patterns of behavior, unexpected emotions, or even solutions that the conscious mind cannot access. Beyond dreams, Jung valued active imagination, a method of engaging directly with unconscious material through creative expression. By writing dialogues with our inner figures, creating art that expresses our emotions, or even moving our bodies in ways that give form to our internal experience, we build bridges between conscious and unconscious aspects of ourselves. Jung also understood the healing power of symbols. He observed that direct confrontation with traumatic material can sometimes be overwhelming, causing us to shut down rather than integrate. Symbolic engagement, through art, ritual, or storytelling, allows us to approach difficult content indirectly, making it more accessible to consciousness. Consider how many healing traditions across cultures use symbolic processes to address trauma. From traditional shamanic practices to modern expressive arts therapies, these approaches recognize what Jung emphasized, that transformation often occurs not through intellectual understanding alone, but through symbolic experience that engages the whole person. This brings us to Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of psychological integration through which we become more fully ourselves. Individuation isn't about achieving perfection or eliminating suffering. Rather, it's about becoming more whole by bringing the disparate parts of our psyche into relationship with one another. For those healing from trauma, individuation involves recognizing how our wounds have shaped us without allowing them to define us. It means reclaiming projections, integrating shadow aspects, and gradually differentiating our authentic self from the adaptations we develop to survive. Jung believed that this journey toward wholeness was not just personally healing, but collectively necessary. "The world hangs on a thin thread," he once remarked, "and that thread is the psyche of man." He understood that unhealed collective trauma perpetuates cycles of harm across generations. When we do our individual healing work, we contribute to the healing of our families, communities, and ultimately our world. As we move into the final part of our exploration, we'll examine specific strategies for breaking the trauma cycle based on Jung's insights. We'll look at how to recognize when we're being driven by unconscious complexes, how to work with triggers as opportunities for healing, and how to gradually reclaim our authentic nature from the grip of adaptive patterns. The journey we're describing isn't a quick fix. It's a profound process of self-discovery that unfolds over time. But as Jung assured us, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Stay with me as we continue this awakening process together. Welcome to the final part of our exploration into how, according to Jung, we become what we don't heal. So far, we've examined how unresolved trauma shapes our identity, perpetuates cycles of suffering, and how our wounds, once acknowledged, can transform into sources of wisdom. Now, let's focus on practical applications of Jung's insights, how we can break the trauma cycle and move toward genuine healing. Jung was emphatic that awareness alone, while crucial, is often insufficient for transformation. Knowledge does not enrich us. It removes us more and more from the mythic world in which we were once at home by right of birth, he wrote. True, healing requires not just intellectual understanding, but embodied experience. We must not only know our patterns, but feel them, engage with them, and actively choose new responses. The first step in breaking the trauma cycle is learning to recognize when we've been triggered. Jung would encourage us to pay close attention to moments of disproportionate emotional reactivity when our response seems stronger than the situation warrants. These moments are gold for the person committed to healing, as they reveal where our unconscious complexes are active. Rather than judging these reactions, Jung would invite us to become curious witnesses. What sensations arise in your body when triggered? What thoughts flood your mind? What impulses do you feel? By observing these responses without immediately acting on them, we create space between stimulus and reaction, the space where choice becomes possible. Jung understood that healing happens in relationship. While much of his work focused on the internal world, he recognized that our wounds occurred in relationship and must be healed in relationship. This is why he valued the therapeutic alliance so deeply. It provides a container where old patterns can emerge, be recognized, and gradually transformed. In your daily life, relationships offer constant opportunities to identify and work with your unhealed aspects. Notice the people who consistently trigger strong reactions in you. Rather than assuming the problem lies entirely with them, ask yourself, what might this person be activating in me? What unacknowledged part of myself might they represent? Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to reflect Our inner state suggests that even our apparently random encounters may serve our healing process. The colleague who pushes your buttons, the partner who triggers your insecurities, the friend whose behavior mirrors your own unacknowledged traits, all may be unwitting participants in your journey toward wholeness. Beyond awareness and relationship, Jung emphasized the importance of symbolic action in healing trauma. When we give external form to our internal experience through art, writing, movement, or ritual, we engage with unconscious material in ways that pure intellectual analysis cannot reach. Consider creating a dialogue with your wounded parts through journaling. If your inner critic constantly berates you, write out a conversation with this critical voice. Ask it questions. What are you afraid would happen if you weren't constantly criticizing me? What are you trying to protect me from? Often, you'll discover that even your most painful patterns originally formed as attempts at self-protection. Jung was particularly interested in how symbols and archetypes could facilitate healing. He observed that direct confrontation with traumatic material sometimes reinforces defenses rather than dissolving them. Symbolic approaches allow us to engage with difficult content indirectly, making transformation possible where direct confrontation might fail. This is why practices like dream work, art therapy, or work with fairy tales and myths can be so powerful for trauma healing. They allow us to approach our wounds through the language of the unconscious itself, imagery, metaphor, and story. Another crucial aspect of breaking the trauma cycle is reclaiming projection. When we project our unhealed aspects onto others, we remain powerless to transform them. By recognizing that what triggers us most intensely in others often reflects disowned parts of ourselves, we bring these projections back home, where healing becomes possible. This doesn't mean blaming ourselves for others' behavior. Jung was clear about the reality of external events and others' actions. Rather, it means recognizing our subjective contribution to our experiences. The question becomes not, why do others keep treating me this way? But what in me continues to participate in these dynamics? Jung believed that each of us has an innate drive toward wholeness, what he called the self, the organizing center of the total personality. This self, distinct from the ego, guides the individuation process, often communicating through dreams, intuitions, and meaningful coincidences. Healing trauma involves learning to listen to these communications, to trust the wisdom of your deeper nature as it guides you toward integration. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. This becoming isn't about achieving some idealized version of yourself free from all wounds. Rather, it's about embracing the fullness of your humanity, including your vulnerabilities, your shadows, and yes, your trauma, and allowing these aspects to inform rather than dominate your life. As we conclude our exploration, I want to emphasize that healing is not a destination, but a journey. There may be no point at which you can say, "My trauma is completely healed." Instead, you may find your relationship to your wounds transforming over time. What once controlled you becomes material for growth. What once seemed like your greatest weakness reveals itself as the source of your deepest empathy and wisdom. This is the ultimate reversal of the trauma cycle. Not that you eliminate your wounds, but that you integrate them so thoroughly they become sources of strength rather than suffering. You don't become what you don't heal. You become whole by healing. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I invite you to reflect on what resonated most deeply for you. What patterns in your life might be connected to unhealed aspects of yourself? What first step might you take toward bringing these aspects into consciousness? If this exploration has touched something in you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What insight struck you most powerfully? Has Jung's perspective shifted how you view your own patterns? If you found value in this video, please subscribe to Espelio Interno and share it with others who might benefit from these insights. Breaking the cycle of trauma is not just personal healing, it's how we transform our collective patterns as well. If you've watched this far, write in the comments, "I choose healing." This simple affirmation acknowledges both the reality of your wounds and your commitment to transforming your relationship with them. Remember, as Jung himself said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." The power of that choice, to heal, to integrate, to become whole, lies within you, and it begins with the willingness to face what has remained in shadow, trusting that when you turn toward your wounds with consciousness, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may you walk the path of healing with courage, compassion, and the unshakable knowing that your wounds, fully embraced, can become your greatest gifts to the world.